Isusu da mari yemogo muzabusa mazigi ka muda manje chete muzabusa mazigi bari manje bhazi remangoma kuzosungwa kumana basimbavha kaizvo mbavha muzozibata bari isusu zvikutiraya kudayo kuti muri arame kumba uko bari mukutitsvaira ipapo manje ipapo zvanyanya kana uchitodzika mukombe kudai nga chasara kusungwa tobuda pagedhi pako padheni pako.
In fact, you are seeing is an unacceptable crackdown on human rights. What you are seeing is a authoritarian hegemony, authoritarian consolidation, and this is happening a few days before the SADC summit.
Yeah. And then nyika yedu iri kukokotiwa pasi vanhu vachifunga kuti ndezve Zanu PF asi zve Zanu PF ndezve Zimbabwe.
Now this is the free talk. In the past week, Zimbabwe hosted the SADC summit, and a number of leaders across the region were in Zimbabwe. Roads were fixed. Something that the young people, the millennials, the Gen Z have not seen happening in Zimbabwe for the longest time. And people now are looking at it with marvel. Now, is this the Zimbabwe that we are going to see going forward, or it's going to be default? And there's also been a lot of talk in terms of who is the genuine opposition that will keep the ruling elites in check, given the vast array of corruption that has been reported in the media over the past few weeks. Now on this, the Free Talk with me, your host as usual, Dara B, we look into these serious issues that afflict us and answer the biggest question, so what? Now join me after this break as we talk people, power, and economy. Welcome back to this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. I'm your host as usual, Dara B, here on Heart and Soul TV and radio. And this evening, I'm joined by Chenai Mutamba Sere, a development economist, a Zimbabwean who has been looking at these issues, how the economy and the politics affect each other, the political economy of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much and welcome to the Free Talk, Chenai.
Thank you, Blessed. Good evening. Thank you for hosting me.
Amazing. Now, Chenai, let us start with the issues around the money. A lot of our young people this past few weeks witnessed what could be the biggest development in Zimbabwe over the past few years since independence. What does this mean to the young or to the ordinary people of Zimbabwe?
Are we speaking about the SADC, Blessed? I must check because I have to say I felt that the performance was very underwhelming. For me personally, I remember in the 80s when I think it was Samora Machel came to Zimbabwe, and I was just a primary school student living in Gweru. And it was so remarkable that I remember those events to this day. And I was going to school in Gweru. What we have seen with SADC has been hugely underwhelming. I don't believe that children, those that are going to school, that they really did feel the impact that they felt, the experience of having so many heads of state and having just a lot of movement and engagement around the SADC summit. I felt that most of the engagement happened in Harare, and it was a very kind of, highway to Mount Hamden from Harare. So, I feel like it was too kind of micromanaged, if I can say that word, and really centered on Harare, centered even on Mnangagwa himself. So there was a real missed opportunity with the SADC summit, which really speaks, I think, to the issues that are happening in Zimbabwe, the prevailing matters that still the huge elephant in the room really, I think, overshadowed the SADC summit.
Yeah, but you look at the massive road network, the infrastructure that Mnangagwa has put there. Don't you think that this is a legacy for a president who has just served just under 2 terms? You know, the Mount Hampton, the beautiful roads, the palm trees, and the pavers on Zimbabwe's highway. On Zimbabwe's roads.
Well, when you speak to legacy, you speak to meeting the desires of the people that you serve, right? So we want to really understand, particularly that highway to Mount Hampden. What even is the footfall? What is the demand for such a road? We are seeing, Bulawayo, which is the second largest city in Harare, still, the roads to Victoria Falls, the roads around it are very much, they've not been developed. They've been underdeveloped for the last 2 decades, and nothing seems to be changing. So in as much as, we've got the big brand spanking new parliament, how well does it meet the requirements of the people of Zimbabwe? How do I wake up tomorrow and say my life has changed because there was a new road with palm trees that was developed for SADC? In effect, really, when we look at where we are, the prevailing circumstances around the impact of the El Nino climate phenomena, the impact of the phenomenon expected in sort of the November, December, and early January next year, that we've actually diverted funds into something that perhaps would have fallen a little bit further down the priority list. So when you speak to legacy, it's a matter of service. Can that 5-year-old say, on this day, there was a SADC summit and my life changed in this way? How has it impacted the ordinary person in Zimbabwe? And I cannot say what they've benefited from palm trees.
But someone would say that Zimbabweans have a knack of just criticizing and not trying and not appreciating what's being happening, with the new dispensation coming through, and this is an opposition mentality. How would you push back to that?
Well, the numbers don't lie, right? We're saying that if we trace specifically the SADC summit, do we see lives changing in Bulawayo? Do we see lives changing in Masvingo? Do we see lives changing in Gweru as a result of the SADC summit? So this is why I say it was very much a missed opportunity. Even the heads of states themselves, they were out as soon as they arrived. We had a grand arrival on Friday of the majority of them. And I think, was it Sunday, everybody had left. So there was nothing really to feed off of the summit in terms of even our tourism beyond Harare, beyond the actual sitting down at Mount Hampden. So, we got to look at the facts, right? Has anything changed? Has inflation improved? Have we managed to arrest the currency crisis because of the SADC summit? What have been the inflows as a result of that? And really, just by looking on the street, we cannot see any evidence of that. We can't even get children in school to retell the story of the SADC summit, So I feel that it was a missed opportunity. Yes, we might say that, we are speaking to issues of legitimacy, etc. But even then, we should have really seen a bit more benefit from hosting a whole SADC summit. As a country, we should have seen even the tourism industry, whether it's in Victoria Falls, in Inyanga, everywhere. We should have seen an impact of the SADC summit, and really that, it's really underwhelming the way that was run, and the impact that it's had on us, on our economy.
Yeah, so you talk about the figures and you talk about the economy. I want us to zero in the area, because that's your area of specialty, Chennai. The funding of the road network. What do we know about it? And and how does it affect Zimbabwe's economy, particularly the local currency that has just been that has just over a little over 100 days in circulation?
Well, the local currency, as we know, is continuing to fail. They anticipated that the introduction of a local currency would bring a bit more stability into the economy. But if you were to go onto the street right now, there's still a vast difference between the prevailing exchange rate on the power market and what the bank will say. So we are seeing here that we are coming back to zero. We're coming back to where we were before April, which is what we tried to say to the governor at the time, that we didn't think that the benefits that they were kind of selling this on would be achieved. We are seeing things like you're talking about the construction of the road network. We've had issues, Blessed, as you know, in terms of procurement and the way that procurement is undertaken in Zimbabwe. To this day, we're not clear in terms of the contractors that are awarded these contracts to deliver the roads. We're not seeing that even having a change on local employment. So if we were to zero in just on that one initiative, we should have been able to count and say, this is how it has affected unemployment. We've seen young people, we've seen small businesses being part of that road construction. But this is not the case. We're seeing these contracts are being parceled out either to external Chinese contractors or even those that are more politically aligned as political elites. So we are not really, there's no multiplier effect from the fact that we've constructed a road. We've not had other providers in the industry, whether it is in development of the material to construct a road. We've not really seen any local benefits of such initiatives. And this is because, like I said, the contracting process, the tendering process is not yet watertight, is not yet transparent, as we've seen in previous reports, whether it be from the Audit General or other investigative reports that have been released in the last few months.
Yeah. So you talk about this in other countries. People construct themselves out of a deflation mode, and construction is seen as a way of reviving the economy. And you're saying to us here that this construction phase that we're seeing has not had that effect. Can you explain that to me?
Okay, so the opportunities that we look to see when we speak of government public sector contracts, particularly in infrastructure, you go to South Africa, you'll see that infrastructure contracts have been a huge contributor in community development, because what they've been able to do is to say, right, if a business, whether it's a mining business or whatever it is looking to invest in an area, that what comes with that is the employment of locals, particularly in constructing the supporting infrastructure for that business. And what that means is we have small businesses that might get overwhelmed with the construction of a huge road network, but they come in together as partners. They get that opportunity through a partnership. So the tender actually specifies that for you to win this tender, you have to be able to work with local small to medium enterprises. You've got to be able to hire locals as well as part of that tender. But because in Zimbabwe, we don't even know, the next thing we see is the road is being constructed. There's not been any publication or any announcements of invitation to tender. There's no, so we have a gap between, we've got no middle income because everything is going to the already elite, those that are already connected in government. So, and that leaves behind a whole generation, especially of young people. For you to start a business, it has to be some kind of hustle community, not a formal business that you can say, I took part in the construction, I set up my small business, me and my brother, and we do construction, And these are the opportunities that we have been looking for quite a long time in Zimbabwe, and nothing has been presented to us by this government.
But this government has called itself the empowerer of locals. It says that since it came in, it has looked at young people and given them opportunities, and you're saying to the contrary. Let's talk figures here. We haven't seen black companies like Exodus, owned by Exodus Makumbe, that's doing the roads, and this is a guy who 20 years ago would not have been doing these contracts. These contracts would have been reserved for the big construction companies. I mean, is this not a plus for the Zimbabwean government?
That's a very specific case study that you raise, and without really more details, I would say that in terms of when you now look at construction, the fact that you can come up with one name for a sector like construction, it's not one of those kind of you're not building a spaceship, you're constructing a road, right? So why do we have just one or two names in such a sector? It should not be like that, right? If we have somebody who perhaps is leading in this area, then what we would look to do through our government contracts is to actually press on them to say, can you show us how you're working with small to medium enterprises? Can you show us how you're providing employment for the locals, and we're expecting this much percentage for this value contract? The very fact that when we look at key industries, whether it's in infrastructure, whether even in agriculture, or even in the telecoms network, we're speaking to perhaps less than 10 people. This should not be the case when we're looking at a country that is keen on distribution of wealth, that is keen on young people development.
Yep. So you have okay. Let me get to this first. I was speaking to Professor Gift Mganu. He says that this construction has left Zimbabwe in a serious debt crisis because most of these contractors have not been paid. And he foresees that the local currency is going to plummet or plunge when government pays these contractors. Now, let us talk about the financing model. As an economist, do you think that the financing model of these infrastructure projects by government is sustainable?
Okay, so what we are seeing with government, if we rewind back to April, blessed, before the announcement of the ZiG, what became obvious was a few facts. That Zimbabwe was predominantly a dollar economy. The monetary statement that was released in April showed that. I think it showed that nearly in terms of broad stocks, we were looking at 80% US dollar. In terms of how much in reserves was over 70% was US dollar. So you've got to think, why are we having this drive for local currency? When you now look at the reserves and you look at the trade balance, you see that we haven't had enough increase to really meet our short-term obligations. And so this is where the governor, or the Monetary Policy Committee, I should say, have actually then decided to go ahead and print new local currency, presumably, and I assume to service the local contracts. And what then happens is local contractors are then paid in this ZiG currency. That really is not, in terms of maintaining store of value, does not mean much to them. Their raw materials are paid for in US dollar. We are very much an import-backed economy when you look at our value chain. So they're being paid in local currency, the ZiG in this instance. And because they then want to quickly convert this into US dollar, that's what is then leading into the depreciation of the local currency. So we're stuck in this cycle of the government is overspending. We've seen what happened before the elections and after the elections in terms of the fiscus. They are overspending. They realize they haven't got any more money. And what do? We introduce a new currency that gives us an opportunity to print. We have asked, even up to now, the figure that is being printed keeps changing. At one point they said I can't remember when we're going to have 100% will be using ZiG, and we're thinking, when did you announce that you're going to print more than 90 million worth of ZiG? So this is what they're flooding the market with, this funny money called ZiG. The contractors then quickly want to convert it back into US dollar, and that is resulting in depreciation. Well, it's funny money because if you trace back into what it has been defined as for quite some time now. In April, when the governor started, he was careful to say this is an asset-backed structured currency backed by reserves. And then as the conversation continued, it was now backed by gold. As the conversation continued, it was backed by minerals. So we've never really been able to tie it down. It's clearly not a structured currency because structured currency has got convertibility. When you say, essentially what you're saying is we've got 100 million worth of gold stored somewhere. So if ever you want to convert your currency into gold, it's possible. That's a structured currency, right? And then it's also it's valued on the performance of the asset. So if you are saying that your currency is structured on minerals, be it gold, then we should really see the value of that currency go up or down based on the value of gold, right? Or based on the value of the stocks that you have structured it against. But this is not what is happening in Zimbabwe, as we know. It's very much a transactional currency that is really, the value is driven by the person who is holding it and the transaction they want to complete.
So another conversation, you said that this is, it's actually fake money. Can we have that conversation again? Because, you know.
I think I said funny money.
No, there was another conversation that we had some time ago. Yeah, and you were, I think you're saying fiat money, rather.
Yes.
And there's this conversation that look, this money here is backed by foreign currency, it's backed by gold and a basket of other minerals. Now, this is what the Reserve Bank has said. Now, I want us to zero in on this statement that the Reserve Bank has used, that is backed by gold, a basket of minerals, and actual foreign currency reserves that the RBZ does hold. Now, government has then said that all services, all government services should be paid for in the local ZiG currency, maybe except the passport and other few things that they've omitted. But how do you determine what exactly gives value when you are putting everything in one basket? Because, for instance, if gold is gaining, but platinum is losing, and the US dollar is falling, how do you balance that? For a layman, because I want to be able to understand this basket, how do you then balance the value of the money when all these things that are in the same basket are competing for value?
Okay, so this is where really this isn't a structured currency at all. Because what would happen in the version of a structured currency, I guess the closest I can use as an example is the IMF special drawing rights. So what you do when you withdraw your special drawing rights, it will tell you you've got 500 million US dollars worth of drawing rights, right? But they will be valued to the yen at this rate, to the rand at this rate, and so on and so forth, as of a point in time, right? So you, the holder of the special drawing rights, if you say, right, I just want to check, if I was to convert these to yen today, what would be my spot rate? You go back to the IMF, they have a sort of database that you use, you calculate, you move on, right? When we are given this structured currency called ZiG, we were told, and I think they tried to show us, look, yeah, the reserves, here's the gold, and I think there were very few gold bars. There was never anyone that said, for every one ZiG, the gold that we have as of today is valued at 1,000 US dollars. Plus, it's also valued at 2 bars of platinum, which we value today using the US dollar for commonality at such and such. So, it's almost like you're holding, to put it simply, you're holding a loaf of bread, right? And that loaf of bread is split into platinum, gold, and US dollars, yeah? But over here, there's a running total that tells you every day that we value the platinum aspect of that loaf of bread using this spot rate. We value the gold aspect of that loaf of bread using this asset. And we do the same with the US dollar. So as you are holding it, this is how much I've got. If I forget, I can go back on the Reserve Bank database and check. I can also walk into wherever they have platinum or gold and swap, right? Because that's what my money is tracking, this value. But because when they announced and said we're having a structured currency, or we are having, in fact, now they've changed to an asset-backed currency. It's no longer structured. Whatever the asset is, we don't know. There's no spot rates that have been announced that are in particular to that asset. So therefore, what is driving the value of the ZiG is the fact that we have a forced transaction. The civil servants are getting paid in ZiG, the contractors are getting paid in ZiG. And when you also raised the point that the minister said you can now use ZiG for everything, but we've not got enough ZiG to cover everything. Zimbabwe is a $10 billion economy, right? So if we suddenly wanted to pay for fuel for all your rates, your taxes in ZiG, we would have to have $10 billion worth of ZiG in the economy. And last time the governor said he was only printing $90 million worth of ZiG. So these are just empty remarks. They're political statements designed perhaps to shut up the gallery, because then he can walk away and say, well, I announced that you could. Whether you can depends on how many ZiG you actually can access, right? It also depends on the exchange. Does the person that you're exchanging with, do they want ZiG? Because they've got to think about the downstream impact on them and their business.
Yeah, and just the headlines over the past week have been talking around prices going up, skyrocketing and stuff like that. What does this tell us, for the ordinary Zimbabwean, they out there who's holding the ZiG, but that local currency continues to be stable on the RBZ chart, but prices are going up.
So a couple of things that are happening with the Zimbabwe economy, Blessed. Firstly, the midterm review revealed that our agriculture production has gone down by 20. We are on minus 21%. Right. This is, I think, the worst it has been, even during COVID, because they had the command agriculture and so on and so forth. That is very low. And what that is telling us is, in terms of local produce, we are coming into or experiencing one of our worst seasons. So therefore, we are now having to import a lot of our raw materials and a lot of our finished products. And that puts pressure on the US dollar and the US dollar value. So what then the businesses have to do? Businesses have always got to take into account the risk and also take into account their profit. So the moment we realize that there's a potential shortage, there's been other rumblings that have come through the press. I think we had a couple of weeks ago, was it a week ago, an announcement that we're moving into de-dollarization. That creates an unsettling, it erodes further the trust deficit that already is prevailing in Zimbabwe. So prices will go up. There are a lot of factors that are compounding prices in Zimbabwe, and I don't believe that we've seen the worst of it yet.
Yeah, but what is the significance of a stable rate when prices are going up? I want to be able to understand that, because you are sitting there and someone is telling you that one United States dollar is equivalent to 13.5 ZiG, but then the value in terms of buying doesn't make sense. So help me understand this, because I'm not an economist. I want someone who's listening to this program, who's a young person who's never been in economic class, or my grandmother in Dotito there, to understand this when they're holding their money and its ability to buy.
Well, this has been the biggest fraud of really from the Reserve Bank. I have called it in the past a money heist. Why do I say that? The announcement of these exchange rates, right, it means that there's a certain group of people that do have access, whether it's through the interchange auction or through their banks, to US dollar using this discounted rate. Yeah, we have to call it a spade a spade. This is a discounted rate. It does not reflect the sentiments that are expressed in the monetary statement of willing buyer, willing seller, because they are pegging it. So there's no price discovery that is happening there. And those that can access at that rate remain, they are always at an advantage. There are very few. And they are really the reason why we have depleted foreign reserves in the country, right? Because that's where, how else are we raising the monies to be able to sell at those discounted rates? So this is the issue. It's an impact on you and I. It's an impact on the ordinary person, because you're almost giving a tax incentive, you know, to the elite without being told that that is what you're doing. And if that incentive was then being passed on to the consumers, where we are seeing, you know, whether it's National Foods or whomever it is, and is receiving those discounted rates, then their prices are should also be discounted, right? But that is not what we see in Zimbabwe, as you know.
Yeah. You have also, let us talk about this aspect of the economy and politics in Zimbabwe. How is it playing out? How is it balancing out? Because we have seen in other countries, like for instance, where there's Yoweri Museveni, there's not really much democracy to talk about. There is there, but the economy is working. Now, here in Zimbabwe, there's always this issue that because there's no legitimacy, so the economy is not working and stuff like that. Now, as an economist, how do we balance this?
Well, what we see in Zimbabwe is we have an economic infrastructure that is predominantly designed to support incumbency, right? And that really is an outcome of legitimacy. So one of the first things that happened when Mnangagwa is inaugurated is he announces, you look at the Ministry of Finance, right? Because corruption is a huge problem in Zimbabwe. I think we've had figures such as $100 million being lost every month due to corruption. And when it comes to corruption, the buck, I believe, the first line of defense is the Ministry of Finance. But what do we see happens with the Ministry of Finance? Soon after inauguration is we see the appointment of Mnangagwa's own son as the Deputy Minister of Finance. We see ZEDA, which was developed as an investment authority in itself, also coming in under the Ministry of Finance. This then turns the Ministry of Finance away from meritocracy, away from technocracy, to partisan political ministry. So therefore, when we are starting to question what about corruption, what about all these procurement contracts, that it's actually the Ministry of Finance that they're the final signature on those contracts. So that has been set up to support Mnangagwa's incumbency. You look at the army, it's again a similar appointment of Sean Mnangagwa. You look at what is happening in mines, and then you look at Mutapa Investment Fund. Mutapa Investment Fund is home to the ZIM asset. You know, when I say the ZIM asset, to where the value, the biggest value, the country's value in terms of mining, you know, you've got Kuvimba Mining being part of Mutapa Investment Fund. And what we are seeing there is that has been moved under the direct control and oversight of the former governor, Mangudjka, who in himself is an ally of Mnangagwa. So our infrastructure, the pillar, what should then be the cornerstones of our economy, have been converted into partisan departments, into the support of incumbency. Again, we see, you know, in terms of fiscal policy and fiscal drivers, we saw a lot of government spending just before the elections. We saw the support of bonuses being given to the judges. We had a lot of, the luxury vehicles that were given to the judges. We saw an increase even in allowances going up nearly up to 50%, you know. And so we are seeing a diversion of resources to support incumbency. And when we say divert, what we mean is where we've got huge social protection issues. You know, Zimbabwe, I think we've got 7 million people in Zimbabwe living in extreme poverty. And yet we can have the luxury of some of these expenses directly aligned to elections. We saw the by-election. I think, did we end up having 3 post-general election by-election cycles, each costing a minimum of $5 million, which again could have been put to better use. So the legitimacy argument is real, because this is what we are seeing, that we've got a setup, the architecture is currently designed to support incumbency rather than to support the development of the country.
Yeah, but what would you then say? I mean, what would be your pushback? Because you're talking about these by-elections, they're necessary and they're part of the cost of democracy. We suppose, Chennai, to violate our constitution because there's a drought?
Sorry, when you're saying violate your constitution, do you mean in relation to the by-elections?
Yeah, not having the by-elections and saving the 5 million. I mean, that would be a violation of the constitution.
Well, I suppose in terms of the constitution, we've got to really rewind, to the start of what was the trigger of these by-elections. There is no, you would struggle even to explain it to my 5-year-old, I don't think, to say that hardly a month and in the same week that members of parliament are sworn in, they are recalled and forced into a by-election. We speak of the constitution, yes. We speak of the courts, yes. But first comes logic, The reason why people end up in the courts is because we have failed to reason with each other. And when we look at reason from a position of logical standing, that did not stack up. That we saw really the Speaker of Parliament, that was quite shocking. The way that those events took place, right up until to the point where people were taken off the ballots and so on and so forth. It really made a joke of some of our most serious institutions, such as the House of Parliament and such as the courts.
Now, Chennai, you have been very vocal and critical on social media platforms, and you've been talking around issues of governance and the political direction that this country has taken. But what has caught my interest most is your discussion around the legitimacy of the opposition in Zimbabwe. So some say the ruling elites are doing what they're doing because there is no legitimate opposition in this country. What is your view around that?
Well, I think that is a very, I guess to them, it's a valid opinion. But when we speak to opposition, right, we had a general election in 2023. We've got to lay down the facts. Yeah. When we had that general election, there was a presidential candidate. We had MP candidates and councillor candidates, right? So this idea that there's an absence of opposition does not stack up to me, because we've got to align it to events, right? Right now, you and I could say, let's start a party. Yeah. Are we then straight away recognized as opposition? No, because officially, the opposition element comes back to an election. If we are to say, let's invite opposition, let's invite the candidates, the participants of the last general election, and they still exist, they're still very much around. And even the issue of the election in itself is not completed, right? Because we know that we, as a country, we failed all the litmus tests in terms of the credibility of the last election. So really, to then turn around and say opposition does not exist, I think that is nuanced in a lot of things. We've got to recognize the fact that we had an election, there were candidates on the ballot at that election. And so officially, they continue to be recognized as such.
And the argument is that those candidates, or those people who were leading supposedly the opposition, have failed the people, and they must make space for new faces.
I'm not sure what that means, because, in terms of politics is down to, as I always say, that the politician's job is to convince the people, right? And as far as a political leader, you've been able to sustain the support from the masses. You've been able to stand and and fill a room with people that want to support you. Then you're doing a good job, right? That is the job of a politician. The job of civic society, for instance, is a different one. Civic society might be split on different pillars of perhaps may it be conscientization, may it be education, may it, there's different, and what I have seen, particularly in the discourse online, is we are failing to really understand the different actors that need to come on board fully to support the development of Zimbabwe's move away from tyrannical rule. It cannot be down to political candidates that are able to get 2 million votes, political candidates that are able to get, members of parliament voted in, have achieved what a political candidate is supposed to do, right? Because when you strip everything else away, that is the job of being a political candidate. And I think we tend to kind of, because of the way the situation is, I think in Zimbabwe, there's been a lot of overreach in terms of what is the role of political candidates, what is the role of civic society, and what is the role of all of us,
But do you think that this academic approach to Zimbabwean politics, where people sit down to debate and analyze and not do anything about it, is the biggest Achilles heel in terms of achieving desired goals?
I think it's possible because, we do get analysis paralysis, especially because this has been going on for so long, so it's possible sometimes, especially when the finger pointing starts, that you end up just going round in circles, which really plays to the advantage of the incumbent. They can carry on, the looting won't stop because we are occupied over here with the blame game, or we are occupied with analysis. I think we need to recognize what our roles are, the different actors that are required on the table, and really just go in and everybody plays their parts.
Yeah. Now, let us look at the run to SADC. There was 150 people arrested. Some are still in cells right now fighting for their freedom. And Namatai Kwekweza being one of them, arrested for an offense that allegedly happened while she was in South Africa. Now, let us look at these events vis-a-vis, the legitimacy aspect that we're talking about and the buy-in to economic policies by the ordinary people. How does this help, or does it not help the economic recovery of this country?
Well, in terms of economic recovery, for sure, it's counterproductive, because what it shows is we have really a government that is operating with impunity, in the sense that, anybody can get arrested. You could come in, set up your business, and if somebody, the political elite, don't like you, it could get taken away, you could be arrested, and all of this and so on. So what it means is, in terms of investment, real genuine investors will stay away from Zimbabwe. If they do come into Zimbabwe, they do not keep their money in Zimbabwe. They're in it and they leave the flight as quickly as they can, right? And they're quite extractive as well. So because you're not getting investors that want to stay the course of perhaps building a value chain and seeing it. They come in, they extract, they take what they can, and they leave. Because we've got a government that is not afraid to arrest anyone. And when that happens, the courts are willing to overstep even the Constitution and the bail rights that the Constitution calls for. And people are incarcerated. We've had people now in prison for nearly 3 months in pre-trial incarceration. And there's really no sound basis why they've been denied bail. So all these things point to the fact that our country is not a respecter of its constitution. Our courts neither. They are the same. And in terms of whether you can get arrested, it then, it comes into as well the realms of property rights and so on and so forth. Because if you cannot host a luncheon in your back garden without your guests being arrested, is what has happened with Senator Timber, then what does that mean about me and my property? Is my property truly independent of the state? And so on and so forth. So this has been, and it will continue to, unless we have a change in government. Even just reforms will not address this, because this will continue to hang over us as a country that is operating with impunity at the moment.
Yeah. So I want us to keep looking at this. The thinking that I've heard is that Zimbabwe's economy is largely informal, and therefore, for economic recovery, I mean, you can push back if I'm wrong. For economic recovery, that would make sense. You'd need serious buy-in from the informal sector, and the fact that the government does not trust its own people, if just as they were hosting SADC, like as was alluded and confirmed by Christopher Mutsvangwa, that these people were arrested so that they clear spaces for the visitors. It's really difficult to have someone who's holding their money at their home to come and put it in a bank because they don't trust those in charge, because those in charge don't trust those they're ruling. Does it make sense to you?
I mean, it's in terms of how people interact with the banking sector. A couple of things. Obviously, the trust deficit. We've got a framework where the Minister of Finance can just make random announcements in terms of statutory instruments. We've seen that in the past. So you never really know if I deposit my money as US dollars, can I get it out as US dollars? Will that change? We've never really recovered from the days of 1:1, in terms of the bond notes when that was introduced. And we have seen time and time again, the government converting people's balances into a different currency. So that trust element is totally lost. Then, in terms of the informal economy, because of its resilience and because of the way it works, right? It's very much what we would call a demand deposit economy. So when I make the money, I want to straight away go and buy something with it, right? So the transaction cost of me even trying to go and find a bank to deposit the money perhaps does not make sense because I need to use it. So I would rather keep it with me. I do my transactions. Perhaps I might even be able to change it a couple of times. That might generate some passive profits for me. And then once I've done that, immediately I need to go and buy food to put on the table that very same day. So in terms, they will continue to be. Our current economic framework does not support, nor does it recognize the informal sector. They're kind of vendors, and they can be taken off the streets anytime, and then there's no protection even in terms of, you look at the sanitation in the areas that they operate in. There's no recognition, in spite of the fact that 90% of young people, the type of employment that they're getting is through the informal sector.
No, but yeah. So looking at that, you talk about the trust deficit. I spoke to Persistent Gwanyanya, and he said that the RBZ is working very hard to bring back this trust, and that it is ensuring that even the RBZ governor, John Mshavan, said, I think more than 8 times when he launched the ZiG, not under my watch. Isn't that enough?
It's not. I mean, you have to walk. Talk is cheap, as they say. You have to walk the talk. So it's all very nice saying not under my watch. And I mean, we've heard these statements before. Mbudzi said he would resign, and so on and so forth. So really, we are having a governor who, unfortunately or fortunately or whatever the case may be, we cannot take him for his word because experience has taught us better. And not only that, even the policies that he's introducing, for you to say at the start of April, I will not print anymore, it's going to be $90 million US. And just 2 months in, you're announcing that the economy is going to be 100% ZiG, so you can't even see it through. You can't stick to your own policy statements. And so how can anyone trust you?
Let's go to the remittances. I mean, obviously, the RBZ said that it was not going to touch people's remittances. But the deputy governor from the RBZ said he wanted to look at a way of keeping these remittances in the banking system. And in his own words, he said that they might leave the bank at some point as ZiG. Now their statement said nothing of this sort is going to happen. Are Zimbabweans supposed to be worried? Or maybe let's look at the impact of the statement.
Well, the impact of the statement is that they're just forcing more and more transactions outside of the formal economy. You know, we already have those outlets anyway, you know, because we have Zimbabweans that are in the diaspora and in Zimbabwe having businesses. So the network already exists, you know. The moment you introduce that element of confusion, or I mean, it was a very reckless and irresponsible statement to begin with. It should have been backed at least by some indicative policy pronouncements. But to just insist that we can do this, which is what we have seen in Zimbabwe, it's a matter of we can do it. And for sure they can, you know, because what do you do? When do you take them to the courts? What will you get out of that? So what it tells me, being in the diaspora, is I need to find a network to send money to Zimbabwe, because you've got to remember that people in the diaspora, you know, they're not sitting on hoards of cash. You know, it's almost a philanthropic service where you say there's a need, therefore I'm going to try and get this money. And so I need to make sure, I need to do all that I can to make sure that that transaction is secure. And if there's any indications that it won't be, then I'm going to find another way to send that money. And those networks exist. And what that will mean is we will have less and less currency passing through the formal channels of the economy. So that was a very reckless and dangerous statement.
Yeah. And just today, I mean, there was the speech on the 2024 mid-year review and the statement actually looks at the remittances growth to Zimbabwe. And it says here that remittances grew significantly by 16.5% from 1 billion in the first half of 2023 to 1.2 billion in 2024, reflecting higher inward remittances from the diaspora, resulting in a favorable impact on the current account balance. How important are these remittances in terms of keeping the Zimbabwean economy alive?
I think they're very important because in the last monetary statement, I think remittances must have been at number 2 after the platinum group. So this is a very important component in terms of foreign direct investment. However, that does not necessarily mean that there's a huge return on these remittances as they come into Zimbabwe. It's likely that I get my money, I'm keeping it under my pillow, I'm going to South Africa to buy something. And also, blessed, one of the things that I've observed is that in years or in periods where we've had significant, whether it's health shocks or it's drought shocks, then the remittances tend to increase. So this is what we learned, especially from the COVID time. Does that mean that the current account balance then becomes sustainably high? This has not been the case, because what happens is we are using this money to meet a very specific need, whether it's within the health sector. But what we find is, we're taking the money out, paying cash at the doctors to pay or whatever, and they're depositing their money in Botswana or South Africa or even under their bed, you know. So that money does not stay long enough in the economy for that multiplier effect to happen in terms of current account balances. It's very much a revolving door. It comes in, I take it out, it's under my pillow, it's in South Africa, it's in Botswana, you know, and so on and so forth. So it's unfortunate, and also the other reason why we're seeing that increase, blessed, is the increase in migration. You know, we are seeing a lot of young people. I think UK reported in the last year, just the UK alone, at least 30,000 people that moved from Zimbabwe to the UK. So some of that increase, again, is because we have more, the migrant population out of Zimbabwe has increased. And that, again, is speaking to the hardships and the economic hardships that the Zimbabweans are facing that are forcing them to leave the country of their heritage.
Yeah, so are you saying that these figures here that the minister talks of are feja, because he's saying this money doesn't stay in this current account, but he's reporting to the nation that the current account of this country is healthier and much stabler. But the RBZ governor is saying also something else. The deputy governor was saying something else that confirms what you're saying, that money is just taken out and it's in the pockets, it's under the pillow.
Well, look at this. I mean, we have to look at indicators, right? So that it's not just a conversation based on hearsay and my personal opinions. You look at the midterm budget statement, it speaks to the fact that Wange Colliery, for example, is on standstill. They can't afford to pay to meet the wage bill. They can't afford to pay the short-term obligations. With the current account surplus, you would be able to do that. It's really that simple, right? You cannot say you're in surplus. So it's, you cannot walk into a home where there's no food and the father is saying I have a surplus, because they would buy food, right? So we've got to look at the indicators. The current account surplus goes beyond, it's not just a revolving balance. We've got to see if indeed we have the surplus. Is it being held as reserves? And is it servicing the economy? What have we done in terms of infrastructure development? Why can we not meet our obligations in terms of civil sector wage bills? Why can we not offer, employees the increment that is required given the rate of inflation, and so on and so forth? Why do hospitals not have paracetamol? If that is the case, if we have a current account balance, we should be able to disburse enough to state hospitals to meet those immediate needs.
Yeah, so on this program, when we have such discussions, we also want to be able to offer, the solutions, how to take this country forward and how to make things better for all of us. And I think this is the point we are at, Chennai, to say, after observing all this, how do we improve people's lives? What advice can we give to those in power?
Well, the issue, Blessed, the elephant in the room is the one about borrowed clothes, right? Now, I don't know about you. I went to boarding school, and in boarding school, we used to change clothes, used to borrow somebody's clothes and go into a disco or whatever. And you always wondered, will they let me actually wear that dress? And because you were not sure, you reacted a certain way. The legitimacy crisis is a big deal for Zimbabwe. The fact that we have an incumbent in borrowed clothes means that they have designed the system to prop themselves up, to make sure that they remain secure. And because that is the case, resources will continue being diverted away from the things that Zimbabweans require, such as social protection, the resilience that is needed to be put into the informal sector so that, it thrives. The fact that we have got no line of defense when it comes to corruption. If we really wanted to do something tomorrow, I would say let's get an independent Ministry of Finance. Let's get an independent judiciary system that passes the litmus test of independence. So we've got to. These are some of the hallmarks that are missing in the Zimbabwean setup, and it really comes down to the issue of legitimacy. As long as that remains, we will just be going around in circles. If we wanted to introduce a quick win, let's do something about the judiciary services, and let's do something about our line of defense against corruption.
And how do you see this happening? How do you see us getting there, Chennai? How do you see us getting there?
Well, I think in the first instance is a recognition that the existing government will not make these reforms because they need to support their own incumbency, right? And this is where, so I was speaking to somebody, for instance, about the debt dialogue crisis. And I think there's an opportunity there that we've missed significantly, where they've created these pillars to address the debt dialogue in Zimbabwe. But if we strip all these things away and say, how can those that are interested, those that have a stake in Zimbabwe, support the Zimbabweans to achieve the first layer of reform, which is speaking to judiciary services, which is speaking to being able actually to host credible elections. Because as long as the people do not have that social contract with government, then government can just do whatever it likes, right? And the social contract comes to us through voting, through knowing that our votes truly count.
Yeah. I wanted us also to just look at advice that you could give the RBZ governor in terms of the local currency. How do we make it work if we can make it work?
Okay, so the first step in the short to medium term is let's just focus on the fact that we're a dollarized economy. Everything says so, right? We have the broad stocks to prove it. We have the reserves to prove it. Let's focus on stabilizing our economy by ensuring that we remain very much a dollar economy until such a point that we've got enough productive value in our economy to create a demand for local currency, right? Money is an answer, it's a response to something, right? Unless if you look at our exports, blessed, over the last, say, 3 years, we have really carried on around the same median, which has been around, I think, 600 million US dollars. Yeah. We are not doing better. We're not producing more. We're not selling more. Therefore, why do we have this idea of a local currency unless we are creating it to undertake some further clandestine activities that will divert value from our economy and divert resource from our economy and result in increased inflation and increased depreciation of the local currency in any case.
Now, what do you think would be the major, the succession issue, how much would the succession issue contribute the recovery of Zimbabwean economy, in your view?
Well, that if we can have a real, true and proper succession process, that will, in the first instance, restore confidence in the economy. It will put us in good standing as a country because we become normal. It gives us some extent of normalcy. Then the other thing that happens is we restore the social contract. So politicians know that if they underperform, they will be voted out. We restore the social contract between the citizens and the politicians. At the moment, it's a very much an imbalanced relationship where the politicians have the upper hand, and it should not be like that, to put it quite simply.
Amazing. I want to thank you very much, Chenai, for coming through on this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. But before I let you go, Chenai, I want you to be, if there's anything that I didn't ask you, something that you strongly feel you need to share with the people of Zimbabwe, your fellow citizens, something coming from your heart, just under 2 minutes.
I would say to fellow citizens that, we need to play our part. We need to really get to a place where it's us, the citizens, that are shouting the loudest, that are doing everything that we possibly can to reclaim our country, to reclaim the value that we know our country has. We should not be having 7 million of us living in abject poverty at a time where we know we've got the best mineral deposits in the region. We've got so much, our land has got so much to give. So it really comes down to us, the real custodians of Zimbabwe, really deciding unequivocally that we need to do something about the situation in our country and play our part.
Amazing. Do something for ourselves, and it's our country. When the country succeeds economically, it means all of us, all its citizens, have benefit, and we become better, our children and their children, and we leave a legacy. So it is incumbent upon us at this level that this country is, before it goes beyond repair, that we try and stand up together and repair it, and not to do the blame game. Now, thank you very much, Chenai Mutambase. Sorry. No,
I'm not going to help you. I'll let you find it.
No, I said Mutambasere. Did I get?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So Chenai Mutambasere, and a development economist. you know, and it's always important to have discussions, to put context, to put policy, and to look at the figures, you know, instead of just always talking about the politics and the big propaganda words without looking and trying to identify where the money is going and how the politics is affecting the economy. And we were just connecting those dots with Chennai here on this, the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. I want to thank you very much and wish you a very, very good night.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful.